Start. All right, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen, and I am the Outreach Coordinator with South Florida Wildlife Center. So for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are a wildlife hospital that is located in Fort Lauderdale, and our mission is to rescue and rehabilitate sick and injured wildlife for release back out into the wild, as well as educate the community on peaceful coexistence with our wild neighbors. So once a month, we do host a wild lecture series where we bring in a range of speakers to come in and educate us about the work that they are doing that is related to conservation. So today we are really excited to have Matthew Danihel here with us from the American Kestrel Partnership, and he is going to be talking all about American kestrels and their decline and kind of reasons why that is happening. So we are really excited to have him here. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight this so you guys can see him. All right, and then he is here with us, and you guys should be able to see his screen pretty large now. We will have time for questions at the very end of his presentation while he's talking. If you guys want to make sure you don't forget your questions, you're welcome to throw them in the chat too. But otherwise, Matthew, I'll go ahead and let you take over.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to be here. Any excuse that I get to talk about kestrels, I'm happy to do it. So thank you for being here and listening. And let's get right to it. So before I dive in too much, I want to make sure that we all know what bird we're talking about. So the American kestrel seen there on the right, looking very handsome. This is a bird that was formerly known as the sparrowhawk back in the 1800s.
Hey, Matthew, I'm going to cut you off really quick. We can't see your screen.
Oh dear. Well, that is not ideal. We've only been doing Zoom for 4 years. You'd think I know what I was doing by now.
There's so many extra steps now.
Is that working better?
Yes, I can see all your slides on the side, so I'm not sure if you want to change which screen we're looking at, but yeah, perfect. Now we can see everything.
Okay. Pandemic turned us all into a early 2000 cell phone ad. Can you hear me? Can you see this?
Totally accurate.
All right, so take two. American kestrel, formerly known as the sparrowhawk, and since then the name was changed based on the resemblance to a lot of species from the old world, meaning Africa, Europe, Asia, that are the kestrel family. And since then, more current genetic research has found that they're actually not closely related to those birds either. So American kestrel might also be a misnomer. They are more closely related, it's now believed, to the larger falcons that we have here in North America, the gerfalcon, prairie falcon, peregrine falcon being kind of the most famous. But what they are a falcon, as I mentioned, and they're North America's smallest, most widespread, and most colorful falcon, certainly. And they're a species that is a bit unique among raptors in that they're sexually dimorphic in both size and coloration. Sexually dimorphic is science speak for basically the boys and girls are different. And difference in size is fairly typical for raptors. Females tend to be larger than males in birds of prey, but coloration is sort of unique, that you can tell male and kestrel females apart based solely on the way they look. So your male there on the left, they've got blue wings and a single dark band on the tail, whereas the females have those orange wings and multiple dark tail bands. And if you're not looking at them from the back, you can still tell them apart based on the chest. Those males have nice spots on the chest as adults, and the females are more of a streaky coloration. And this photo also shows you a little bit the difference in size between the two. That male's very poofed out, to use the scientific term, trying to look big, but the female's still there looming over him, so to speak. So the American Kestrel, Falco sparvarius, the scientific name, and there are a lot of subspecies, 17 in total. But we can pretty much ignore 15 of those for the purpose of this talk. There are only 2 that are found in North America. And the vast majority of them are that top one there, the Northern American Kestrel. But where y'all are located, down in the Southeast, you're a bit of a special case because you've got the Southeastern American Kestrel down there. And they're very similar in appearance, but some small differences. But the Southeastern American Kestrels limited to just peninsular Florida, and then a little bit west on the Gulf Coast and north on the Atlantic coast up to about South Carolina or so. And then that bird on the right there is actually the Panamanian subspecies taken by one of our biologists down there. So these are, as you might guess by the fact that there's 17 subspecies, these guys are fairly adaptable. They tend to prefer open country with scattered perches where they can kind of see their whole territory, see what's there, whether that's prey for swooping down on or whether it's a larger predator coming at them. They like to be able to see that whole area, and so they tend to avoid forested areas and dense areas where they can't see around as well. But open country is a pretty wide description, and so these birds can be found in everything from deserts to grasslands, marshes, farmlands, and even up to and including suburbs and cities. So 2 of those pictures down there on the right side, we got a bird in suburbs in a backyard in Colorado, and then I absolutely love that one on the right. That is 2 fledgling kestrels looking in the window of a 17th floor apartment in the middle of downtown Chicago Loop. You can actually see the L train in the background there. Not where you'd expect to find kestrels, but they made it happen, and they are far from the only city-dwelling birds that we hear about here. They are a very widespread species, as I mentioned, and as you can see from that map there on the left, these birds will breed basically as far north as they can find suitable nesting habitat, up to where the tree line ends in Alaska and all the way down south to the southern tip of Tierra del Fuego in Argentina. And throughout this range, these different populations have different migratory strategies. Some of them migrate, such as the Alaska subpopulation. They're not hanging there for winter. I can't blame them. Whereas other populations, like the Southeastern American Kestrel, where y'all are at, those are fully residential, meaning they don't go anywhere. They're year round. And then others will have a mix of both. So for example, in Idaho, where I am located, we have birds that stay all winter, and we have others that fly further south. So we get fewer around this time of year, but they're definitely still here in small numbers. Now, as you might be able to imagine, with a species that's this worldwide or continent-wide, we are still looking at quite a bit of them. The worldwide population right now is estimated to be, excuse me, over 4 million, and depending on who you talk to, you can get a number that's up to twice that. So they are not considered to be threatened right now by any major conservation authority. And so things are great, right? Everything's peachy. You all don't need to listen to the rest of this talk. No, that's not true, as evidenced by the fact that I'm here. There is a but, and a big but, or a larger font but down there. And that is that we are seeing significant declines for this species across North America. In the last 60 or so years, we've seen the population decrease by half, which is a loss of over 2 million birds. And man, of course my voice disappears as I start this. I don't need to tell you that's a lot of birds, and it's something that's very concerning, even though we still have quite a few out there. If this decline continues unchecked, we could be looking at a real problem fairly soon. And looking more closely at these declines, they do vary regionally across North America. but we're seeing declines pretty much across the board. The declining areas there seen in red. Gray areas represent areas where the population is either stable, not statistically significantly in decline, but could be in decline as well. And there are a few small and rare areas where the population is actually going up. And you might be looking at that saying, well, that's a lot of gray. Are we really in trouble? Well, a lot of those gray areas are places where there just aren't a lot of kestrels to begin with. And so when there's not a lot of birds there to begin with, that population being stable doesn't mean necessarily as much as an area where there's a lot of kestrels being stable. And so we sort of have to take that map with a grain of salt, so to speak. Just to dive a little bit more into what I'm talking about here with regional variation, these are some of the 31 subdivisions called bird conservation regions within North America, and what the kestrel population is doing in each of those areas. So, for example, the Southern Rockies there in the top left, we're seeing a decline of about 50%, which is pretty akin to what the overall average is across North America. Where you all are at, Peninsular Florida, things are a little better with I shouldn't say just, but a lower 33% population decline since the 1960s. But take note of those numbers there. We're going from basically one bird every 4 surveys to slightly less than that. So obviously not a lot that we started with, and still not a lot. One of the biggest declines that we've seen is over there, the New England, Mid-Atlantic states, further north of y'all. Big declines there, 93%. And that is one of the largest in all of North America. Coastal California there in the bottom left, about 70% there. An area where there's no statistical change, no statistically significant change, the Great Basin. But you can see that line does look like it's going down. It's not a statistically significant change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the population isn't going down there. It could just mean that decline isn't steep enough that we can say for sure whether it's a decline, but we also can't say that it's not a decline either. And then, as I mentioned, 31 of these bird conservation regions, only 2 of them have a statistically significant increase in kestrels. One of them on the right there, the Tamaulipan brushlands. But note where we started on them. Basically no kestrels in this area in the 1960s. And since then, we've gone up to, we're seeing one every 3rd or every 2nd survey. So yeah, it's a significant increase, but given where we started, we're still not talking about a whole lot of birds being there. So the $1 million question, and what you all are here to listen to me talk about, why is this happening? What is causing these declines? And to answer that question, I'm going to first talk a little bit about some of these declines that have occurred in other birds of prey, because this is something that unfortunately is not unique to American kestrels. Of all of the raptor species in the world, over 50% of them are considered to be in decline right now, and around 1 in 5 are considered endangered. So things are not good for a lot of raptor species right now. But some of these declines have been fixed. And so looking at some of these, this is probably the most famous one here in North America, the decline of a number of different raptor species, such as the peregrine falcon, the osprey, the bald eagle. And these were primarily caused by the pesticide DDT. Guessing a lot of folks in here have heard of this. And it was a pesticide that worked its way up the food chain into birds of prey, and it caused them to lay eggs with shells that were too thin. So when the female would sit on them to incubate them, she'd actually break her own eggs. And so very few birds, young birds being produced, population went down. We figured that out. DDT was banned in the 1970s, and population since recovered magnificently. And in fact, the peregrine falcon was the first species that was removed from the endangered species list as a result of recovery back in 1999. Another example, another famous one, is the California condor. This was a species that was driven to a low of just 22 individuals. Tiny, tiny number. In the 1980s, in fact, every single bird remaining in the wild was brought into captivity for a couple years, while a captive breeding program was established, and while we figured out what the problem was. And it turns out that it's an issue with lead poisoning. And so addressing that lead poisoning has gone a long way to helping to increase that population, which today is over 500 birds, and over 300 of which are in the wild. This is a much less well-known one, in part because it's over in Asia, and this is the Asiatic vulture crisis. And this is a pretty astonishing number. 99% of Asia's vultures disappeared in, figuratively, the blink of an eye. And the reason for this was discovered to be consumption of a veterinary drug called diclofenac. It's a NSAID, which is the same class of drugs as Aleve and Advil, but it causes kidney failure in the vultures. And what was happening was this drug was being used for cattle. If that cow then died anyway, the vultures would come down to clean that up, as vultures do. They'd consume the drug, die of kidney failure because of this drug. Once that was figured out, diclofenac was banned in most of the countries where these species are native, and that population is slowly starting to recover. So a pretty defined pattern seen across all three of those. Step one, got to recognize that there's a problem in the first place. And usually in recovering a species, we're talking about recognizing a decline in that species. Step two, got to figure out what's causing it. If you don't know what's causing it, you can't fix it. Step three, figure out what do we do to fix the problem. And then number four, make that solution happen. And step five, make sure it worked. So for those DDT affected birds, we got all the way through this list, and those species have come back. For California condors, we're kind of in between steps 4 and 5 there, where we're in the process of implementing a solution, and we're also monitoring the population to see how they're recovering. Asian vulture crisis, again, it's kind of the same spot. We're still working on eliminating some similar drugs to diclofenac that have less impact, but still not great. And we're monitoring to see how that population recovers. Well, that brings us to Kestrels. Where are we on these steps with Kestrels? And unfortunately, we're still on identifying the cause. I know the title of my talk here teased that I was going to present exactly what's causing the decline. And unfortunately, we still don't know exactly what that is. We figured out a lot of things that it's not, but we're still figuring out exactly what that cause is. And I'll shed some light on where things are at going forward from here. There have been a whole bunch of things suggested as possible causes of decline. Habitat loss is a big one. It's affected so many species in North America as humans continue to spread out. An associated lack of nest cavities along with habitat loss. Predation by Cooper's hawks has been suggested. Neonicotinoid pesticides. I practiced saying that before this talk and I still butchered it. Neonicotinoid pesticides are something that made a lot of press a couple years ago for their effects on songbirds. So they have also been suggested for kestrels. West Nile virus, another one, GMOs, and then a big bugaboo for a lot of species these days, climate change has been suggested. And there's been some other things as well. So let's go through the list. Habitat loss and lack of nest cavities. This is, you could kind of call it the bluebird hypothesis, because it was something that was very true for bluebird populations. They were limited by lack of nesting cavities. People put up boxes, bluebird population went up. And so kestrels, similar in a lot of ways. They use the same habitat, they nest in cavities, they readily nest in boxes. And so 20 years or so ago, as we were seeing these successes with bluebird populations come back as a result of box programs, The thinking with a lot of folks was, well, let's do the same thing for kestrels. Let's put out a bunch of boxes, the population will come back, right? No. Be nice if that was the case, but unfortunately, what has been observed is all these boxes were put up, kestrels just haven't moved in. A lot of these nest box programs that are out there in North America see plenty of places where there's suitable breeding habitat and lots of these new boxes and other nest cavity sites, and they're just not being used. We've put them out there and the birds just aren't there to use them. And so we've had to go and cross out that bluebird hypothesis, if you want to call it that. So next on the list, how about predation by cooper socks? Cooper socks are a species that are expanding quite a bit. Numbers are going up and have been for quite a while now. So the thinking was, because cooper hawks are big enough to prey on American kestrels and have been documented feeding on the smaller kestrels, is the expansion of cooper hawks causing kestrel populations to go down. Well, if that was the case, we would expect that in areas where the cooper hawk population was going up, we'd see the kestrel population go down. And we're not seeing that. Yes, on a macro scale, cooper hawk populations are going up and kestrels are going down. But when you start to look closer at specific areas, that correlation is just not there. And perhaps the biggest example of this is there are places where kestrels are declining significantly, and there's no cooper hawks there at all. So, for example, this graph on the left or on the right here is showing the occupancy rates from a nest box program up in the Yukon in Canada. Very significant declines there going through the 90s, and things have not rebounded in the 2000s there, though they have steadied, which is nice to see. We're not seeing that everywhere. Down here's the range of the cooper hawk. And for those of you who are not up on your Canadian geography, that is the Yukon up there. Cooper hawks do not have drone strike capabilities. They are not in the Yukon at all, so they can't be causing those declines that we saw in kestrels in that area. And there are other regions that are like this, where perhaps not as stark as this, where there's no cooper hawks at all and a steep decline in kestrels, but this is just sort of the one of the sharpest examples of things that are happening all over when you start to dig into this potential hypothesis. And so we cross predation by cooper hawks off the list, as predation by cooper hawks can't be causing the declines that we're seeing. So how about some of these other things? West Nile virus, pesticides, GMOs. Well, to answer that question, we have to look at the declines that we're seeing. And the kestrels have been declining since, at the very latest, the 1960s. And I say the very latest because that was when we really started paying attention. The declines that we're seeing could have been happening for a bunch longer, and we just weren't looking for it. So because they've been declining since at least the 60s, any potential cause, anything that we're looking at that could have caused this, has to have been around since the 1960s, right? If it was something that popped up later, say in 1990, the graph would look like this. Kestrels would be steady right up until 1990 when that threat arose, and then they'd go down from there. And obviously that's not what we're seeing. Well, let's look at some dates. Neonicotinoid pesticides only came along in the 1980s. West Nile virus only hit North America in 1999. GMOs only came into wide use in the 1970s. 1973 was around the first time that they were first used and planted widely. All of those dates after the 60s. So none of those things can be causing the entire decline that we're seeing in kestrels. There's got to be something else involved. Well, boom, climate change. This is sort of the big one. It's a big problem around the world, certainly across all of the kestrels range. It's been going on since before the 1960s. So it fits everything that we've looked at so far. But let's go back to that graph. And something else to note here, the rate of decline has remained relatively steady since the 1960s. In fact, it's even starting to flatten out a little bit, depending on which authority you talk to recently, especially once we get past where this particular graph ends. And that means that any potential cause that's causing this must also be steady. It can't be something that's increasing, because an increasing threat would show an increasing rate of decline. That line there, the green one, is showing what we'd be looking at with an increasing threat. We'd be seeing birds go down faster and faster and faster as whatever this threat was increases. Well, what's climate change doing? The planet's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And we're seeing more and more of these storms and wildfires and other things as well. It's a spiraling effect. It doesn't match that steady decline that we're seeing since the 60s. If it was climate change, we'd be seeing kestrel populations do more what that green line is showing there. And it's not that. It's that red line that, again, depending on who you talk to and what mathematical model they're using, may even be flattening out, certainly not getting worse. So something that's stable since the 60s is what best fits. But at this point, we've crossed out so many things on this list. Is it just one thing? Or are we looking at multiple causes? And the current thinking is we're looking at multiple things. We've crossed out so many things as an explanation of just one thing. Like, I mentioned those examples earlier. Condors, it's almost entirely lead that caused their decline. Peregrine falcons, bald eagles, it was DDT. Asian vultures, it was diclofenac. We looked for that one thing with kestrels, and it's probably not one thing. And there are a couple of possibilities here. It could be that we're dealing with multiple threats that are sort of going up and down together. That's giving the appearance of a steady decline. So, I've got this map down here at the bottom showing as one threat's getting worse, and then that starts to get better, but then another one pops up. So, just to give some examples, this could be, DDT during that period in the 60s affected them, but then we banned that, it got better. But then a new pesticide came out. And again, that's just an example. But something like that could be explaining the rate of steady decline that we're seeing. Another possibility is kestrels are very widespread, as I mentioned. Birds in one area might not be declining for the same reason that birds in another area might be declining. So they could be facing completely different threats in completely different places. And, the overall result is a fairly equal decline in both places, but caused by different things. And then a third possibility is it might be the same threat in multiple places, but they could be reacting differently to those. And I'll get more to that hypothesis later. But it could even be a combination of all of these things. And really what it boils down to is there is some sort of complex interaction of causes going on with kestrels. And the current state of research is to figure out what those causes are and how they are interacting with each other to cause what we're seeing. And unfortunately, this does something very unfun to this list that I showed you earlier. We crossed off all of those things as a singular cause of potential kestrel decline. When we're considering that it could be a combination of these things, the entire list is suddenly back on. And it could be any one of these things in certain areas or just affecting certain birds. And we have to consider everything as parts of a larger whole. So where is the state of current research? Well, a lot of folks are taking a bit of a different tack now, rather than looking at one thing and saying, is this causing the decline? We're more looking to figure out, well, let's focus on the wheres and the whens of kestrel decline, rather than looking at those whys. And what I mean by this is, well, first off, where are the declines occurring? Is it something that's happening on the breeding grounds, that we're seeing a lot fewer birds survive the summer? Is it something that's happening to migrating birds, where we're losing a bunch of them? Or is it something that's happening where they spend the winter? And figuring out where on the globe will tell us more specifically where to look for potential causes. Along those same lines, the whens. At what age are kestrels declining the most? Are we seeing fewer eggs laid? Are we seeing fewer young survive to fledging? Are there fewer juvenile birds that are surviving their first winter? Or is it something that's more affecting the adult birds? And fewer of them are surviving year to year than they did in the past. So, like I said, if we figure out the where and the when, that'll help us know to look where, and to know where to look more specifically for the why, the whys of what's causing this. So then looking at some of the more recent findings, things that this recent research has uncovered. And if you recall, I mentioned a little bit ago that it could be something where birds in different regions are responding in different ways to the same threats. Well, we're seeing evidence of that compared to birds in Western North America versus birds in Eastern North America. And I say birds, I mean kestrels. So a study by Hawkwatch International looked at data that was taken at wintering sites and also along fall migration locations, and it found pretty significant declines akin to what I was showing in those graphs earlier, just about across the board, except migration counts in Western North America. Those migration counts showed declines, but the wintering counts showed increases. And so what the thinking on that is that rather than those decreased migration counts necessarily meaning a decline, it could be at least part of that decline because the birds just aren't migrating. And that's why the wintering counts have gone up, because more birds are just staying put in Western North America than in years past. So it's an indication that these birds in the West compared to the kestrels in the East might be shifting their migration strategy in recent years. Well, what could that be a result of? And another finding here, another difference between East and West, a study here in Idaho has found that compared to the 1990s, the birds here are initiating their first breeding attempts nearly 5 weeks earlier, which is just a massive change in only a span of about 30 years or so. And that is believed to be a response to the fact that because of climate change, spring is onsetting sooner. The growing season is starting sooner. Farmers are planting sooner, so the insects are coming out sooner. The mice and other mammalian prey that come out to feed on those crops, those are more available to them. And so these kestrels here in Idaho, and similar things have been seen in other Western areas, that they're adjusting their breeding timing to match potentially with climate change. And no such shift is being seen in Eastern kestrels, which again raises more questions. Why is it that seemingly the birds in the West are adapting to climate change better than the ones in the East? Well, another recent study has found that the Eastern birds, maybe they would want to shift, but they don't have a choice. Eastern birds have a smaller window in which they can successfully breed. And the reason for that is the effects of climate change out west are different than they are in the East. Here in the East, we're getting more severe storms later in the winter, and it's getting hotter in the summer. So the window in which Eastern birds in the East have to breed is getting smaller as a result of climate change. And that exact same shift is not being seen in the West. They still have a bigger window, and so they're able to shift their breeding earlier to better match with what the climate's doing, with prey availability. And because it's staying warmer in the winter, they're able to skip migration and stay home, which involves less of a stress on them, and the risks that come along with migrating long distances every year. So that could explain why, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing these major declines, particularly in the mid-Atlantic states, whereas things are more stable in certain areas of the West. And then another study that is currently ongoing, but has generated some pretty exciting results early on. And this is a modeling project that's looking at a host of different data sets of breeding activity and sightings and migration data and wintering data, and pretty much any kestrel data you can find went into this model that they are building, looking again at the wheres and the whens of kestrel decline. And what they're finding is that the problem early seems to be that it's juvenile survival rates that are what's declining the most, basically meaning that compared to how it was back in the 60s, fewer young birds are surviving their first winter. That doesn't tell us why, but it opens us up to test other hypotheses based on this. And one of the current hypotheses is that we are seeing a pretty significant decline right now in insect populations throughout the US and throughout the world. And kestrels, as you might know, eat a lot of insects, and they're easier to catch than mammals. And so juvenile birds tend to go for that easier to catch stuff while they're still learning to hunt. So a decrease in insect populations would disproportionately affect juvenile birds compared to adult birds. And so it's thought that perhaps, and again, I want to stress, this is still very much a hypothesis that needs to be tested. The thought is perhaps that we're looking at a case of the reduced insect populations playing a part in the kestrel declines that we're seeing. So what's next? Well, as I mentioned, we kind of have gone back to that whole giant list of potential threats that could be part of this larger whole. And so as scientists and kestrel researchers, we're having to go back to looking at every one of these possibilities and examine them as part of that larger picture. Which ones are potentially part of this? Where are they causing problems? When are they causing problems? Which birds are they affecting? Are they affecting birds at all? How are they interacting time and location wise with these other possibilities? It's a complex puzzle, but we're getting there, and it's a fun puzzle. Another big help that we have coming out in recent years is that we are able to better map migration. Something that you might not know is that we really still have, while we have a general sense of where kestrels migrate to, we have much less of a sense of where individual birds are going on a micro scale. And the reason for that is because of how small kestrels are. They are only about 100 to 130 grams or so. So they're pretty small birds. And while we have big fancy trackers for larger birds of prey, the tech really hasn't quite gotten small enough yet to really closely analyze where an individual kestrel is going. And it's only in the last couple of years that technology has gotten small enough. And so we're still figuring out where these individual birds are going and where they move on a micro scale. And figuring that out will let us know, all right, these are the specific migration pathways. And it gives us, again, talking about the wheres helping us find the why, it'll let us look at specific regions where a lot of kestrels are using that potentially could be a source of a threat. Once we identify those problem regions, then we can figure out, well, what's the problem in that region? And the biggest thing with kestrels is we want to keep a common species common. There are so many cases where a raptor species has gotten to be endangered, threatened, even critically endangered in more cases than I can list in this talk. We don't want that to happen with kestrels. It's much easier to save a species when you still have 4 million of them as opposed to 22 like we did with the California condor. We want to figure out what the problem is now while we still have lots of kestrels and while we've got wiggle room, so to speak. If we can figure out what's going on now and fix what's going on now, we can take a species that's declining but still common and keep it common for generations to come. I have no idea how I did on time, but that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and like I said, any excuse to talk about kestrels I welcome. So if anybody has any questions, I am all ears.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. If you guys do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then while we're waiting to see if questions come in, I know you have everything up there on where we could find out more about the work that the American Kestrel Partnership is doing and how to keep up to date on all the research that you're talking about. Do you guys have that all on your website?
We do have a lot of it, yeah. I will say a lot of this newest stuff has not made it to the website yet because it is, like I said, brand new.
Very new, yeah.
A lot of it. But a big place for that is the Facebook page. That's the one that we're right on top of, and as these new findings are coming out. There's also our newsletter as well. We welcome folks to sign up for that. That goes out 4 times a year, and as this new research all comes out, that's where we make sure it goes right away until we can sort of do the bigger build of getting on the website.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm not seeing any questions come in. I know I learned a lot about kestrels that I didn't know, as well as all those other species you were talking about at the beginning with the Asiatic vultures and things like that. I didn't know anything about that.
A lot of people don't. Yeah, it's one of those things that the more you learn about it, the more amazed you are that it wasn't a bigger news story.
Right.
And one of the things with that particular crisis, if I can go off topic here for a second, is the health concerns from that. Without these vultures around to do their cleanup duties, obviously more disease is rampant. But one of the things that came out of the Asiatic vulture crisis that was sort of unexpected at the time is without the vultures to do the cleanup, the feral dog population skyrocketed because the dogs were moving into that niche. Well, dogs are mammals. Mammals potentially carry rabies. Rabies does very unfun things to humans. And so that the dog population goes up and rabies in humans went way up. And so the healthcare costs and the human cost of the Asiatic vulture crisis was just absolutely massive. It's hard to put a price tag on a bird, but there'd be a lot of zeros and commas after the price tag of the Asiatic vultures. Yeah. And so it's a very good thing that the problem was realized and that we've been able to work on reversing it before things got even worse than they already were.
Oh, here, and I see Jessica just shared a link. So I'm going to go ahead and share that link with everyone. So Jessica also works for the Peregrine Fund, one of Matt's coworkers. I don't know if it's letting me actually. So here. So if you guys, I'm not able to share the link for whatever reason, but if you guys do want to learn more about, not about American kestrels, but if you want to learn more about this crisis with the Asian vultures, if you go to peregrinefund.org/projects/Asian-vultures, there's more information on there if you guys want to learn more about that. I thought that was really interesting too. And hopefully research continues to go in the way where you guys are either continuing to narrow things down or kind of more pinpointing what is going on with the kestrels that we have here.
And I'll say we're definitely getting there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of exciting stuff that's come out in the past years, and like you and I were talking about before we got started, the more things we cross out, there's fewer things on the list. And yeah, the list kind of opened back up again once we figured out it was probably more than one thing, but we're working down that list again. There's things we've been able to cross out, and it's especially with this new tracking technology that's coming out, it's exciting to think where we're going to be 10 years from now.
Right, exactly. I was thinking too, it'd be interesting to have you guys come back as a speaker in a couple years and kind of tell us what you've narrowed down since then. Sure. From what we've talked about today. But thank you so much for joining us today, Matt, and for all of you that are with us too, whether you're watching this presentation live or you are watching the replay. So we will be putting this recording up on our YouTube channel so you guys can revisit all of the things that Matt discussed today, as well as share with your friends and family if they want to learn more about kestrels or you want to enlighten them about things that are happening out in nature. We encourage you to do so. Make sure you follow the partnership and the Peregrine Fund on social media so you can stay up to date. Of course, connect with their newsletter and all of that good stuff too. And then follow us on social media here at South Florida Wildlife Center. Again, we have speakers come in every month that talk about all kinds of topics that are related to nature, wildlife, and conservation, just like Matt did today. So thank you guys so much. Thank you again, Matt, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Thank you, guys.